healthcare system in Gaza. We've talked about it extensively on the programme this week. It is said now, though, to be completely out of service and is a state of complete collapse. Hospitals are reportedly stopping all now but emergency services as fuel runs out, with some saying even life-saving operations will soon be forced to stop. Last night, a fourth convoy of water, food and medicine entered Gaza from Egypt, but there have been repeated calls for the amount of aid coming in to be significantly stepped up. The Health Ministry says the total death toll from Israeli strikes has now reached more than 6,500 people. More than 750 of those were killed in the past 24 hours. Now, meanwhile, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, says he's shocked at the reaction to a statement he made yesterday about the war between Israel and Hamas, where he said the attacks on October the 7th did not happen in a vacuum.
The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced and their homes demolished.
Israel responded furiously to the comments they claim that justify the Hamas attacks and called for the UN chief that you've just seen there to resign. Well, this afternoon, Guterres addressed the controversy, reiterating that he clearly, he said, condemned the acts of terror. And in the last hour, it's being reported that Israel are delaying their ground invasion into Gaza following an intervention from the White House. Well, we can go live to Tel Aviv now to speak to the journalist Jotam Confino. Jotam, thank you so much for your time. Let's just start with that very latest news, if we can. The reporting that they've said, Israel, OK, we've had pressure from Washington. We are going to delay this ground invasion. I mean, I feel like we've had a conversation like this many times, Jotam. We keep hearing this ground invasion is imminent. When might it be? How long could it have been delayed for?
It might be part of Israel's strategy to publicly say that we are not delaying anything, we're not being pressured by the United States, the ground offensive will happen, but then it doesn't happen. It might be part of a strategy because we keep hearing reports in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, very reliable sources saying that the United States has indeed asked Israel to delay it for different reasons. First of all, to make sure that the United States can bolster its defense across the Middle East. It's already being attacked by Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria, and it knows that the minute Israel goes into Gaza, it's not only going to be Israel that's going to get attacked. The United States is seen as being complicit in this. So I think it's fair to assume at this point that after 19 days, when Israel could clearly have invaded if they wanted to, there's something else at stake. It's not just Israel's considerations, it's the United States. It's also the hostages, 222 hostages, many different nationalities in there. And the minute Israel launches a ground offensive in Gaza, those lives will be not lost, but there will be a great likelihood that they won't be saved. So at this moment, there's nothing official from Israel other than they keep confirming that they will indeed go into Gaza.
Jotam, why do you think that hasn't happened yet then?
I absolutely think that the United States has pulled its strings. It has told Israel, please wait. If you want our full backing, if you want the backing of the most powerful country in the world in this watershed moment where it's either you're with Israel or against Israel, then you need to take our considerations into concern. You have to remember that we have dozens of American hostages. That's a national priority for any country, for the United Kingdom, for the United States. If you have citizens in Gaza, civilians held hostage by a terrorist organization, that's a main priority for you. And secondly, I think that's also really important to note is that the United States, even though it says it's backing Israel when it comes to defending itself and even defending against Hezbollah in Lebanon, the United States is not interested in a full-on war now with Iran and with Hezbollah. It certainly doesn't want to have ground troops in Israel fighting alongside Israeli soldiers. So I think Israel is saying one thing, but is doing another thing, which is actually accommodating those concerns from the United States.
And how much does that delay help Hamas?
It's also a very good question, because the longer Israel waits, the longer Hamas has to prepare for this. Of course, they're also being killed, but Hamas has thousands and thousands of terrorists who are ready to fight, and they're hiding underneath tunnels. And so the longer Israel waits, the better it is for Hamas, because the longer it waits, aid will also start coming in. It already is coming in, and there's pressure to increase the aid. And the longer this standoff continues, the better it is for Hamas. So Israel knows this, and of course is doing everything it can to assassinate as many Hamas members as possible, to strike their infrastructure. But every time they do that, the civilian death toll rises, which is also first of all, horrific for those killed, but it's also very bad for Israel because it loses its support in public opinion, and at some point we'll probably see some of the Western leaders maybe even calling for a ceasefire to prevent more civilians from being killed.
Yeah, and what that is having is sort of repercussions internationally. Explain to us from your perspective what happened yesterday after those comments from Antonio Guterres and the impact that they've had.
Yeah, so of course, Israel and the United States, it's a complicated relationship, to say the least. The United Nations did indeed give Israel the right to exist by establishing a state and voting in favor of it, but it's really, really very often at odds with the United Nations. It has accused several institutions in the United Nations of being outright anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, biased against Israel. The thing we're seeing right now is a very, very aggressive response to Antonio Guterres' remarks about Hamas. I would say it's quite unusual for Israel to be so aggressive against the Secretary General. But it's because Israel has no tolerance right now. That's the perspective, that if you are not 100% clear in your rhetoric about Hamas, if there's even the shred of doubt that this could be justified somehow, what Hamas did, then you're not with us. That's what Israel thinks. So that's why they're really reacting aggressively to this. But I do think there'll be some backlash because they're already fighting with many nations over what's happening in Gaza, and the United Nations is powerful at the end of the day.
What is being tested in the international community is countries like the United Kingdom, Italy, France, Canada, the US, who are saying, look, Israel, we support your right to defend yourself, but you need to minimise civilian casualties. That tension is not going to go away, is it?
Not at all. And it's something, of course, these countries, they have to say that. You know, if you're a leader of a democratic, liberal country, you have to stick with international law. You have to say that you abide by it. You can't back a country which isn't abiding by international law. Now, whether Israel is doing that or not, that's a whole different discussion. There will be many experts on both sides that say Israel is not, because it's collectively punishing Palestinians. And then there'll be others saying, listen, Israel is fighting a terrorist organizations. It's exactly the same scenario as when the United Kingdom and the United States and many other countries fought Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Afghanistan. So this is just a never-ending discussion, really. But I think we have to look at these statements from the United Kingdom and the United States about international law as something of a standard thing to say. At the end of the day, they're still with Israel. They still haven't shifted their alliance or their allegiance to Israel. They're still with Israel and Israel's fight against Hamas.
The reality is as we every day on this programme, what we're hearing is the death toll from inside Gaza goes up by hundreds of people. I feel as though we're sort of running out of words to describe just how dire it is inside Gaza. What do you know about the flowing of aid that's arriving there? Because what we're hearing from, the UN, other bodies, is that it is simply nowhere near sufficient to actually provide them with resources to help any number of people.
That is also what I hear. And because I'm half Danish, I also go on Danish TV. And I was on the other day, right before the Secretary General of the Danish Department of the Red Cross was on. And he said that their aid is coming in, antibiotics, for example, it's coming in, and it's crucial for the hospitals to have this kind of aid. But he reiterated the same thing as the United Nations. He said all of these organizations that obviously point to the fact that 600,000 people have been displaced are now spread over 150 UN facilities, and they are lacking all these essential things. I don't think anyone is really in doubt about the dire situation. Anyone can just have a look at Gaza, look at the ruins. But whether the aid is sufficient to prevent starvation, let's start with that. I think it's simply too hard to know when you're on the other side. I'm not in Gaza, so it's very, very difficult. And one last thing is also that we have to remember that a lot of the information that we're relying on as journalists come from Hamas. And we have to treat the information the same way as if Islamic State or Al-Qaeda were providing crucial information. Some of it is true, but absolutely some of it is not true. It's outright propaganda and lies. So it's very difficult to navigate in this. It's super, super hard for journalists to do their job, but also for everyone in the world to understand exactly what is actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, Jotam, thank you so much, and particularly for those caveats of all the information that we're receiving.